You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have one of my favorite authors and a genuinely great guy to talk with. Nick Petrie is back on the show with his brand new book, the sixth in the Peter Ash series. The Breaker is today release day for that book, Nick?
Yep, today is the day the book drops, bookstores and pretty much everywhere you can buy books.
And congratulations on Peter Ash really coming into his own over the last few years. And I know that this is one of the series that I absolutely look forward to, this time each year.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. It's been a wild ride. I opened this book. The books came in the mail a couple of weeks ago, and I opened it and I saw that there were 6 titles. Like, I'd written 6 books in 6 years. That just it still boggles my mind.
I'll bet. With the 6th book, when you've got that first 5 behind you, it's kind of like you step up to another level in some weird way, and maybe it's just subliminal. But how are you feeling about the character of Ash and your the role that you play in Ash's life? Like, what does it feel like to be, bringing out book 6? Do you feel like Ash is more solidified? How do you feel about your relationship with him, this fictional character?
Well, that's a really great question, actually. You always ask such a great question. It's interesting. I think it was the first novel. So somebody asked me, I did a book event, and somebody in the audience asked me, like, in what way was Peter like me? And I said, oh, he's not like me at all. And my wife in the audience just burst out laughing. And I think in some respects, it's been a journey of realizing exactly how similar we are in our sensibilities and our attitudes. And I'm not a dangerous guy the way that Peter is a dangerous guy, unless you give me a hammer and some framing lumber. I can be pretty dangerous with that. But it's a part of the challenge is to keep Peter evolving from book to book. There are lots of writers where the character is essentially static, and that's just fine. I love those series too, but I think that's actually kind of a hard thing to do. And so my goal is to kind of keep Peter evolving just enough from book to book that he continues to be interesting, and I continue to find kind of new things in his character and in his life to share with readers, so that we just get a little bit more of his life in every book. And it's not just the story that's happening, but we get a little bit of his character, his past, his some piece of Peter's life. In this book, it's really diving into Peter's relationship with June Cassidy, who's his sweet patootie. In a way, this is as much a June Cassidy book as it is a Peter Ash book.
It's funny how people that are close to us, especially spouses, can detect those things when we think we're completely, one way, and then she says, "No, I see how these characters are interwoven with who you really are," and it's funny to get that reality check from someone close to you sometimes.
Well, it's pretty humbling for sure. There are lots of things that contribute to the success of a writer. And honestly, I think the person that you choose to spend your life with makes a big difference in terms of how much support you get and how much encouragement you get. And I've been really, really lucky that Margaret is such a great champion for what I want to do in the world and for my work in general. And I'm my goal obviously is to pay that back in spades. So it's it's an important relationship, I think, for anybody who's trying to do creative work.
For sure. Do you feel like that that completely who Peter Ash is, or is this still a journey of discovery for you? Some characters kind of walk onto the stage with a full backstory and everything, and we know all of their internal struggles and foibles, and the things that they're good at and the things that haunt them. Is that true for Peter Ash, or are you still learning who he is?
Oh God, I hope I'm still learning who he is. My greatest fear as a writer is to bore my readers and we all know writers who we liked their work until we started to feel like they were phoning it in, and that is I'm not sure I would know that. I don't feel like I'm phoning it in, but I'm not sure other writers know if they are or not either. And so that's honestly my greatest fear and insecurity. And so I'm working really hard to help keep Peter evolving and to keep the stories changing. Honestly, that's one of the reasons why I set each book in a different location, because I think using place as a character really helps give each book an identity and to feel distinct from the other books. So that's it's something I've been worrying about, quite honestly, from the start. And I think that's the real challenge. I am in awe of writers who they're 10 books in or 15 books in, or oh my God, 20 books in or more, and the series still feels fresh and bright and interesting. That's my goal.
Yeah. With some books and some ongoing series, after a while of having a character in one place, in one circumstance, a writer will invariably kind of take to the road to switch things up, to change the scenery, and to keep the readers guessing and to keep it fresh for the writer, I would assume. You've kind of done the opposite with The Breaker, and where Peter Ash has kind of been a world roamer, and in this book, there's a sense of roots almost taking hold. What tell me a little bit about the what your thoughts were for this book and why Ash's scenery is changing just a bit.
Well, the first book in the series, The Drifter, is set in Milwaukee, and this is the first book where I've come back to a place again. And so this book is also set in Milwaukee, but it's a different kind of Milwaukee. One of the joys of choosing to set a book in a new location is that I get to choose which version of that location that I'm depicting. I wrote a book called Light It Up, set in Colorado, and it could have been a mountain climbing book. It could have been a skiing book. It could have been, but it's a cannabis book because,
right.
Again, I'm interested in sort of the social issues that are affecting our society. And so the Milwaukee in this book is really sort of Milwaukee's manufacturing past and the future of manufacturing and people who make things, whether there are things that are for good or maybe not so good. I don't ever think, at least not yet, that Peter is going to be rooted in place. But I did want him to have to find a little moment of stability. And that's, he's living with June, his sweetheart, and he's trying to figure out in a little more substantial way kind of what sort of life he wants to live and how he's going to live it. And at the same time, June is sort of looking at their life together and saying to herself, is this, can I do this? Is this what I want? What do I want? So every book is a challenge to, I always begin with kind of where is Peter? What is Peter's kind of emotional moment when the book begins? And once I find that then I can really kind of get started.
Be honest with us, Nick. By giving him a brief window of happiness, you're just using that to rip our hearts out. Ultimately, aren't you?
That is my job, man. My job is to mess with this guy that everybody loves, and to give him this series of challenges, because we all have challenges, right? We all have things to overcome in our lives, and what I love about fiction is watching people do the things that are hard, because there are things in my life that are hard. And so I find inspiration in the books that I read. And by messing with Peter also, I hope that the story is a little more compelling. We add a little risk, a little danger, a little adventure, which is also something I look for when I read.
Well, one thing I love about a Peter Ash book is that there are some protagonists and stars of series that are just nearly supermen, and it's fun to read those as a bit of escapism, and to think of what people are capable of, or you just want to see the good guys just ultimately win. And a Peter Ash novel brings me a different experience. Not that we don't get to see the good guys win out, sometimes, but the thing about Peter Ash that's really fascinating is that he does have PTSD, and you take this PTSD and almost use it as a superpower, when this could be a crippling event, or a crippling set of emotions that he has. What is it about taking something that we might think of as a weakness or a character flaw, and using that to the advantage of the characters and to the advantage of the story?
Well, that's super perceptive of you. I didn't really, that wasn't something I realized I was doing until really I got almost to the end of this book. I don't know. I mean, part of what I'm trying to show through the whole series is Peter's evolution from, kind of being at his worst place, right? He's just out of the military, the post-traumatic stress, which, as you know, takes the form of claustrophobia. He can't be inside for more than 15 or 20 minutes. He can't sleep inside. He's essentially living either in his truck or in a tent in the mountains. And it's to show that evolution from that place toward a more, I don't want to say productive life, because that's really Peter is not living a conventional life, but toward a life that works better for him. And I'm trying to show that evolution, and also some of the skills that Peter learns for coping with post-traumatic stress are also things that all veterans can use. I have a lot of back and forth with veterans who about their own the issues that they have after war, and how this character and those skills that he's learning to adapt are helping them too, which is super heartwarming to be able to actually be of real use in the real world by telling stories. But I think we all have challenges. We all have things in our life that are difficult, and it's sort of Pollyannish to say, well, you take your lemons and you make lemonade. But that's what we all have to do. We all have things that are hard, and we all have to do things that are difficult. And if all you do is sit around and say, oh no, poor me, you're never going to make your life the way you want your life to be. And so Peter really is at essence a happy warrior, and he has his issues, but he tries not to let those get in the way. And he just charges forward, and I think that's a fine life philosophy. It's one that I'm trying hard myself to live up to. And I do think it really is about perception, right? If all you can see are the challenges in your life, it's really hard to move along. But if you can find ways to reframe those as positives, which is really what Peter has done. Post-traumatic stress really is an overactive fight or flight mechanism, and it gets turned on whether you want it to or not. And you can use it as a it can be something that's crippling, or it can be rocket fuel.
Right.
And I think all of us, we have something in us that we can use for rocket fuel in our own lives if we can learn how to do it, if we can allow ourselves to do it.
Well, and we think of that response in a particular way, but it's fight or flight. There's a lot you can do with those two responses.
For sure.
Right.
And that's really where, that's where that techniques comes in, is to turn the panic into focus, right? To turn the fear into decisiveness. And this is something that our soldiers are learning to do now. The Navy SEALs use yoga breathing techniques. I mean, it's crazy stuff. The ways elite athletes are using these techniques to work through their own nerves and to focus on the game ahead. And I mean, this is executives. These skills are now in wide use in the business world as well. I mean, it's crazy stuff, and it really works.
Nick, with 6 books under your belt in this series, and I'm sure you're working on the 7th now. But is there something that you do when that time of year invariably comes around, where you've had a month or two of normalcy of getting, to live Nick's life, and you have to get back into the head of Peter Ash? Are there things that you do? Do you have a ritual or anything that gets you into the mindset of Peter Ash and helps you to channel his story?
I do. I don't ever really have time off of Peter. I'm either finishing a book, or I'm kind of resting for a week or so before the edits come back from my editor, and then I'm working on the edits. Or I'm prepping for the book tour. I'm doing all book events. It's hard for me to take time off, and the schedule is such that I don't really get much time to goof off, which is fine. I'm not beginning to complain, but so I am rarely out of the mindset of Peter Ash, to be honest. Although I'm a big believer in ritual and in sort of showing up at the same time every day. I wake up at anywhere between 6:30 and 7:30, depending on how well I've slept that night and what I've had to do the night before. But I wake up and I do some stretches, because I'm 52 years old, and I spent most of my life doing physical labor, so my body hurts a lot.
Yeah.
And I also meditate, and I've actually learned a lot of this from my research with Peter, that meditation really helps me focus. It helps me, kind of stay disciplined. And like most writers, I have a pretty obnoxious internal critic. And it helps me to sort of see that critic for what it is, which is it's not real. It's just my own, overactive, negative side. Right. So, and then I make a cup of coffee, and I make my breakfast, and I carry them both upstairs to my office. And I open the document on my laptop. I've actually got a big screen on my desk, so I open it up on the big screen, and I eat my breakfast, and I drink my coffee, and I stare at the document. And I'm usually looking at yesterday's work.
Right.
And at a certain point, I will see that a sentence needs to be tweaked, or a paragraph needs to be, kind of reordered, or the scene needs a little more emotion pulled out here, or some action sequence I'm working on isn't very crisp. So I start to make some changes. Excuse me. And that's kind of how I dive into my day. And I treat it more, like a 9 to 5, really. I don't, it's easy for me to say, maybe I won't do some writing today, but I also don't get any writing done. So,
right.
I don't, on a normal day, I'm not on social media until my workday is done. I'm not looking at the news or listening to the radio or listening to any podcast. I love podcasts, but my rule is I don't get to do that until I've got my 1,000 words. And sometimes that 1,000 words happens by 2:00. Sometimes it doesn't happen until 5:00. And as the deadline approaches, those 1,000 words, become 1,200 words or 1,500 words or 1,800 words. as the book begins to accelerate as I work through. But I'm a big fan of keeping your life orderly, so that it's easier to pay attention when the work shows up.
Speaking of book tours, I hate to give any press at all to 2020 because that year is gone, and it can stay in the dumpster fire where it belongs. But we're still in dealing with some of the things that last year brought us, and book tours are very different this year for a lot of people. And I'm assuming that you're doing some virtual visits with people, and of course, podcast visits and stuff like that. But how do you see the events of last year seeping into your work, or are you of the mind that that fiction doesn't need to reflect reality? And do you have thoughts on that, or how the real world seeps into your work, or not?
I mean, I'm really interested in having the real world present in my work. My books, as I said, are all revolve around, each book revolves around kind of a different social issue. Whether it's, veterans or legal cannabis or race and class, or in this book, again, sort of the power of a few tech executives to sort of, inflict their version of what the future should be like on the rest of the world. But I am really reluctant to write about the pandemic. I mean, it's messed with my mojo for sure. I'm a kind of a news junkie, and I've kind of had to dial it back because it's making me crazy. I'm really lucky in that I'm not a frontline worker. I've been working at home for a few years now, and so it hasn't affected that piece of my life. But emotionally, it's messed with me like it's messed with a lot of people. But I really thought about kind of writing the pandemic into the book I'm working on now, and I've talked to some other writers about it, and I really thought about it pretty hard. And really, the conclusion I came to was that I don't want to read about the pandemic. I'm living in the pandemic, and if a magazine is all they're doing is featuring stories on the pandemic, I flip past those stuff to read about the latest movie, right, or a new book I should be reading. So, in a way, one way to cope with the pandemic is to do a little bit less diving into it. And because of the way that I work, I get really emotionally invested in each book, and to have characters coping with the pandemic, I don't know that I want to spend a year that way. So I may revisit it at some point, or I may write a future book where something like that happens. But I'm just really looking forward to this ending, and I don't know that I want to, submerge myself in it anymore.
Yeah. Titles of books are interesting to me, Nick, and sometimes a title is just an afterthought. When you need to slap something on the cover. Sometimes it's more than that. When I first met you, when your book Lighted Up came out, and it was about that cannabis industry in Colorado that we talked about earlier. Lighted Up is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, funny title when you get what the substance of the book is about. What is The Breaker? What does that title represent to you, and what should that mean to us as readers?
Well, I'm really interested actually in this question. And my editor really leans away from, titles that are sort of common sayings. And she has a very definite idea for what titles should be. And as I write every book, a title idea will come up, and I go to the top of the document. And so, the top of my document has a list of anywhere from 10 to 40 title ideas. But I want them to have some relationship to the book itself. And so The Breaker, for me, there's a character in here who really has decided to put his energies into creating something that will benefit only him, and will in fact, wreak a major change on society as a whole. And so that's really what the reference is to a certain extent. But then the titles also refer to the main character in a way as well. And so, there's a lot of demolition in this book. Peter is renovating an old house with his friend Lewis. And so, there's a scene with a crowbar. There's a character with an axe. So there is a lot of demolition in this book as well. And so titles are always kind of ideally riffs on some of the themes. If you can have a couple of layers, a couple of meanings, that's ideal. Titles are not my best thing. Often I'll submit a list, and my editor or my agent will say, well, they'll find one of those and they'll tweak it a little bit. So I never start with a single title, or if I do, it's never the title anybody else likes.
Well, the title of this book, The Breaker, book 6 in the Peter Ash series, available everywhere now when you're hearing this, in Kindle edition or hardcover or audiobook. I've got to tell you, Peter, I have fallen in love with the audiobooks. I've gone back and listened to the audio of every one in the series. They're so fantastic, and I highly recommend them to everyone. We're going to put links where people can find any of those formats that they like in the show notes. Where can people find you online if they want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, Peter? Nick, I'm sorry.
No, I get that a lot, actually. NickPetrie.com.
Great. We'll put links there as well. And Nick, it's always fun chatting and catching up. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Hank. You really do always ask interesting questions. This is always one of my favorite conversations. So thank you.
Both Barrels Publishing is the brainchild of successful indie author James P. Sumner. He has self-published over 15 titles in the last 5 years and has over 800,000 downloads so far in his career, meaning he has a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with the indie publishing community. Knowing the struggles of the modern-day indie author as well as he does, he wanted to create a platform that would allow writers of any level to learn the ropes, navigate the pitfalls, and produce a professional novel without wasting time or money in the process. Both Barrels Publishing is the perfect one-stop shop for any indie author, combining James's expertise with his own team of editors and designers so you can help your novel realize its full potential and learn how to publish yourself. The purpose of Both Barrels Publishing is to help indie authors get their novels ready for publication without all the stress, hassle, and unnecessary expense. We want to make your lives easier, which is why we're giving you access to a top-notch team to publish your novels, along with a generous discount on their services. You can also work one-on-one with James to learn the intricacies of self-publishing. No hidden cost, no false promises. We simply want you to publish the best version of your novel. BothBarrelsPublishing.com.